Last week,
La semana
we
pasada
started a sermon series
empezamos
on the Beatitudes.
una serie de
And I
sermones
saw a
las
Facebook post not
bienaventuranzas
that long after
y
with a
no
picture
mucho
of us
después
gathered
yo
here
vi
together with the
una imagen en
tagline,
Facebook
Sermon on the Lawn.
que llamó sobre nosotros aquí que llamaba
It is perhaps
ese sermón
appropriate
sobre el pasto.
that we are
Quizás es
going
apropiado
through the opening of the
que
Sermon
estamos
on the
entrando
Mount
en la apertura
on the lawn.
de ese sermón, el sermón sobre el monte.
It was a time like this
Era un momento como
where
este
Jesus was sharing
que
with his
Cristo estaba
disciples and the
compartiendo a
crowds
sus discípulos en la
the
audiencia
words
las palabras
of what it means
de
to
lo que
be his
significaba
disciples.
ser sus discípulos.
And he starts, we talked about last week, he starts with this
empieza,
idea
como decimos la
of those
semana
who are
pasada,
truly blessed,
de los que
a
realmente están
description of the blessed
bienaventurados,
ones.
una descripción de los bienaventurados.
Last week,
La
we
semana
started
pasada
with Blessed
comenzamos
are the
con
poor in
bienaventurada
spirit,
los que
for theirs will be the
los
kingdom
pobres en
of
espíritu,
heaven.
porque el suyo es el reino
And we
del
spoke
cielo.
about
Y hablamos
the poor
sobre
in spirit being
los
this
pobres en
recognition
espíritu, de ser una
that we
reconocimiento de
cannot
que no
save
podemos
ourselves,
salvarnos a nosotros mismos,
that this world is
que
just
este mundo es
too
simplemente
for us to
demasiado
figure it out on our own.
Para que nosotros lo solucionemos
And
nosotros
yet,
mismos.
in the midst of that recognition, is this
Pero
other
en el medio de
recognition
esa recognición
that no
hay otra
walls can
recognición de
hold
que
the kingdom of God,
nada puede atajar,
that it is
ninguna
breaking
pared puede
through
atajar
into our
el
here
reino de
and
Dios.
now, and that there is hope.
Y que hay esperanza.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God.
Los
And at the end of the
pobres
sermon last week, I
suyos
gave you an
es el reino de
invitation
Dios.
to hold on to
Y
that
les
saying,
di
to
una
sit with it,
invitación
just
para
a
que
simple verse this week.
ustedes,
To have that verse,
contemplaran
blessed are
este
the poor in
versículo
spirit in one hand
en
and
esta semana.
the newspaper in another, have the daily lives, spiritual beliefs, and think to ourselves,
Pensar
what might God want to be saying
qué
to
es lo que
me
Dios
today?
estará queriendo decirme a mí.
Did you notice
hoy.
anything? Did you hear the
¿Vieron
prompting of the
algo?
Spirit?
Escucharon el
Blessed
llamado
are
del
the poor in
Espíritu.
spirit, for theirs is the
Bienaventur-
kingdom of God, and the kingdom of
Me están
God is
diciendo que
breaking
no me
through.
están escuchando, sin embargo, está el sistema en el más alto
This
posible.
week,
En esta
our
semana,
sermon on the lawn
el sermón
continues in the book of Matthew,
sobre la monte continúa
and
en
it
el libro
continues with
de
this
Mateo
second
y continúa
statement
con el
of those who
segundo
are blessed.
mensaje.
The statement that can either be deeply reassuring or deeply challenging or both, perhaps. Blessed are those that mourn,
Los que
Jesus
lloran,
says,
dice Jesús,
for they will be comforted.
porque serán consolados. Porque recibirán
I don't need to tell
consolación.
you how
Yo no tengo
counterintuitive this
que
is.
decirle lo contradictorio
When grief
parece
comes
ser
upon me,
eso.
I want to resist it. It's too heavy. It's too much. I
Cuando
want to
estoy
resist it, and
triste,
so
yo quiero
too I want to resist
resistirlo.
these words. Blessed are those
Y
who
yo quiero
mourn.
resistir las palabras.
What are you saying
Bienaventurados
here,
los que
Jesus?
lloran. ¿Qué es
I
lo que
want
está
to say,
diciendo
as we
aquí?
start off going through this passage together,
Yo quiero decir,
that
mientras estamos
this
en este
little
pasaje,
phrase, blessed are those
que
that
esta
mourn,
frase
are not a complete explanation of the problem of
no
suffering.
es toda una explicación para el problema
The
de
Bible often
sufrimiento. La Biblia a
talks about the
menudo
reality of
habla
suffering,
de la realidad
but
del
it doesn't always
sufrimiento.
go into the philosophical
Pero no
conversation
siempre
about why
habla la
suffering
parte
exists. We
filosófica
get
de
that in the
por
book
qué
of Job. We can
existe
go
el
through that a little
sufrimiento.
bit more, but this one is just a statement.
Eso es simplemente
You
un
who mourn
comentario. Los
are
que lloran
blessed.
están bienaventurados.
So what might be happening
Entonces, ¿qué es lo
here?
que puede estar sucediendo aquí?
Do you feel that resistance at all?
¿Sientes esta
I
una
know
resistencia?
when we shared earlier
Yo sé cuando
in our announcements
compartimos
that
eso
Pastor
antes
Paul will be
que,
going from us to seminary
el
in
pastor
January,
Paul se va
there might have been a little bit of
nos va a
resistance.
dejar en
Some mourning.
enero. Seguro que había algo de
We don't want that.
resistencia, algo de llanto en nosotros.
And there's
algo de-
resistance to mourning I
y
do
hay
not
una
think is unique to
resistencia.
me.
no es algo
It's dominant
para
in
mí,
our culture, especially here in
eso es algo que
America.
domina en
We're not
nuestra
particularly
cultura.
good with
No
mourning.
estamos muy bien con eso de
One pastor puts it this
orar.
way.
Un pastor dice
Have you
así,
noticed how our
¿te
culture
has dado
embraces
cuenta cómo
entertainment
nuestra
and the pursuit of
cultura
pleasure at any and all
acepta el
cost?
entretenimiento,
Most
la-
of life today
el
is spent
placer
avoiding sorrow and pain,
a
and even when we
cualquier
get bad
costo en
news,
la vida?
maybe we'll say something funny to lighten the
Pero
mood, because
cuando
the mantra of our
recibimos
day
malas
is,
noticias,
blessed are those who
solemos
laugh their way through life.
buscar la manera de hacernos reír.
Most people will do almost
La
anything
mayoría
to
de la
stifle
gente
sadness or to
harán
stop a tear
cualquier
from
cosa
falling.
para no llorar.
These are not feelings we usually
Esos no son
embrace.
sentimientos que solemos abrazar,
And so the
aceptar.
philosophy of the world
Entonces,
can
la
be, forget your
filosofía
troubles.
puedes de este mundo,
Don't face them.
olvídate de tus problemas, no
Downplay
enfrenten
them,
tus
minimize
problemas,
them, pretend
minimiza-
that the situation isn't
minimícelos,
bad, that we're just around the corner,
suponga
that
que haz
that we
como
can
la
ignore what
situación
is
no es tan
happening, or
malo,
drown
porque
them
podemos
maybe in a bottle, or
ignorarlos,
escape on YouTube,
podemos
or medicate
ignorarlos,
yourself, or go on a
escapar
cruise
por la
ship, or
medicación, por
do
YouTube,
whatever you
o
can
por una
to not
bebida. Haz lo que
dwell
puedas
on your
para
problems,
no quedar en tus
to
problemas.
not
Eso es el
mourn.
mensaje del mundo, no llorar.
I don't know if you guys remember
Yo no sé si ustedes se recuerdan
the TV show
el programa de
America's Funniest Home
televisión,
Videos.
los videos
Anybody
más
here
simpáticos en
remember this? A
América.
couple of you.
Algunos de ustedes sí se
I watched them
recuerdan.
in
Yo
South
los
Africa, so I don't
miraba
remember when they were on
en
TV
mi
here.
país, en Sudáfrica, no me acuerdo cuando
But
estaban
we
en la
enjoyed
televisión
parts of
aquí,
it.
pero nos gusta algunos
But my mom always
partes de eso.
had a
Mi
real
mamá
trouble with
siempre
one
tenía
segment.
problemas con
There was a
un
segment of
segmento.
America's Funniest Home
Era una
Videos
parte donde
where
donde
we laughed
nos
because
reíamos
somebody got hurt.
porque alguien se
You know those
lesionaba.
ones?
¿Te recuerdas?
Somebody fell out of a car, or fell out of a
Alguien
boat, or a
caía
tree
de un
fell on them,
auto,
or
un barco,
you know?
o un
and you laughed
árbol
because you
se
assumed that they would be
cayó.
okay, or else
Te
the video
reías
wouldn't get
porque
sent in.
tomabas
But
por
my
dado que
mom
iban a estar
said to
bien,
me,
pero a mi
what are we
mamá,
training
mi
ourselves
mamá
for?
siempre me decía,
Why are we
¿a
laughing?
qué estamos entrenándolos? ¿Para qué estamos
There's a shirt that
entrenándolos?
says,
¿Por
it's
qué
only
estamos
funny until
riendo?
someone gets hurt.
Hay
Then it's hilarious.
dicho que solo es
Have you
simpático hasta que
seen that
alguien
shirt?
se lesione y entonces es
It was very popular.
simpático. ¿Te recuerdas?
It's only funny till someone gets hurt. Then it's hilarious.
Ya es súper simpático cuando alguien se lesiona. ¿Tiene
It might be
sentido?
indicative
Puede ser
of
que
our
puede
resistance
ser simbólico de
acknowledging
nuestra
hurt
resistencia
pain
a
or
al
mourning.
dolor, a sentir
And what do we lose
Y
when we lose this ability
baja.
to mourn pain? Either somebody else's or
Sí,
our own.
ellos decían que se escuchaba demasiado.
Sometimes we might even think that as Christians it's inappropriate to mourn. We might have had somebody tell us, don't be sad. Remember the resurrection. Or don't be sad, God has a plan. And those are powerful. The second part of the statement is
Y la
powerful,
segunda
but
parte del
I'm not
tema
the
es que
first.
no estoy tan seguro de la
Where does this
primera
idea
parte.
that the lives of the
¿De dónde
followers of
viene esa
Jesus
idea de
doesn't
que
involve sadness?
Las
Where
vidas
does
de
that idea
los
come from?
seguidores de Cristo no
I mean, sometimes we want to skip
deben
over the mourning
enfrentar
and just get to the
tristeza.
comfort. Jesus doesn't say here,
Cristo no dice
experience loss, they
bienaventurados
will be comforted.
los que
The loss
se
happens and
ríen
then the
porque
comfort
van a ser
immediately.
consuelos.
Jesus says,
Disculpa,
blessed are those who mourn,
bienaventurados los que pierdan
who
van a ser.
mourn, for they will be comforted.
Él dice bienaventurados
King
los
David
que
experienced such
lloran porque
sorrow. In
serán
Psalm 6, verse
consolados.
6, he says, I am worn out from
David
sobbing.
dice que
All
estoy
night I flood my bed with
cansado
weeping,
por
drenching it with my
llorar.
tears.
mojando mi
Jesus
cama
himself
con mis
wept.
lágrimas. Cristo mismo lloró.
So why do we think
Entonces, ¿por qué pensamos
we might somehow make it through
que
life
podamos pasar
without
por la vida
weeping?
sin llorar?
without mourning?
Sin llorar.
I want to suggest this
Yo
morning three possible
Sugerir
things that we
tres
lose.
posibles
when
cosas
we
que
resist
perdimos cuando
mourning.
resistimos al
And I will say
llorar.
again here
Voy a
that
decir
this
otra
is
vez
hard. It
que
is
es
hard to mourn, and
difícil,
the
es
deep
difícil
losses are
llorar.
particularly challenging. And if
Y
you are
las
going through a
pérdidas
deep pain right
profundas
now,
son aún más difíciles para
it is
enfrentar.
hard.
Si estás experimentando una pérdida es
Today's sermon
difícil.
isn't an explanation
Ese
of
sermón no
why
es una
we suffer, but it
explicación
is
sobre el por
what
qué.
we lose when we
Es una
refuse to
explicación sobre
mourn.
qué es lo que perdimos cuando rehusamos
By
llorar.
resisting mourning,
Al resistir
I suggest
llorar, yo
we
les
resist reality.
sugiero que
By
resistimos a la
resisting
realidad,
mourning, I will suggest this morning that we resist love.
rechazamos el amor
And by resisting
y
mourning, I will suggest this morning
resistimos
that we are resisting comfort.
en la consolación también.
So let's start with the
Entonces, vamos a
first. What do I
empezar
mean
con
by saying
la
by
primera.
resisting mourning?
¿Qué quiero decir
we're
cuando
resisting
digo al resistir
reality.
el llorar, estamos
When I was
resistiendo a
in
la
college, in the very
realidad?
freshman,
Cuando
I
yo
think I
estaba
was, I
en mi
remember
primer
having a
año en la
professor
universidad, yo me
say to
recuerdo
me
tener
something along the
un
lines
un
of,
profesor decir algo como
there will be a great grief, great.
va a haber una gran
And I remember saying
pérdida.
to her something like, "Oh, I've been blessed. Nothing terrible has happened to me yet." And she looked at me
Ella me miró
and said,
y me dijo,
"It will."
algo mal te va a suceder en
I
algún momento
mean,
de tu vida.
it might be
Yo
a
me
bit
acuerdo
harsh,
que eso era un poquito duro
but she was saying it
decir,
with
pero
kindness,
él lo estaba
actually.
diciendo con ternura,
Because there is
de
something
hecho,
about
porque hay algo
recognizing this truth,
en reconocer esta verdad,
that in this
que
world and
en
in this
este
life,
mundo, en
grief
esta
will
vida,
be
vamos
inevitable.
a
We
estar
live in a broken world.
con tristeza.
A world that
Vivimos en un mundo
brokenness seems
quebrantado, un
more
mundo
evident each passing day,
que
right?
eso es más evidente
And to
a
imagine we
medida
can
que
get
pasan
through
los
this
días.
life
Y pensar
without
que podamos
mourning and
imaginar
without
que podamos
pain is
pasar
like
por esta vida
imagining
sin
that we can
dolor,
walk
sin
barefoot
llorar.
through a sea of
Es
broken
como
glass
pensar que
without cutting
podemos
our feet.
caminar por un mar de
The
vidrio
world is broken
um,
and there are sharp
sin
edges
cortar nuestros pies.
and it will hurt.
Y el mundo tiene muchos
And we as Christians, we
momentos
don't get to
puntiagudos y
avoid
vamos
loss
a
or
experimentar los
suffering.
dolores. Y como cristianos no tenemos el lujo de no sufrir,
My professor,
no experimentar
when she
sufrimiento.
looked
Mi
at me and said,
profesora,
terrible
cuando me
things will
miró
happen,
y me dijo,
could
terribles
also
cosas
have
te van a
looked at me and
suceder,
said,
podría haberme mirado y dicho,
terrible things are happening.
cosas
Perhaps you're
terribles
just not seeing
están
them.
ocurriendo, quizás no los estás
Perhaps you're
viendo,
just not seeing
quizás
clearly.
no estás viendo las cosas claramente.
You know, I grew up in South Africa
Saben,
in the
yo
90s.
crecí
Terrible things were
en
happening.
Sudáfrica en los
I
90.
just wasn't seeing them clearly.
Malas cosas estaban sucediendo, pero yo simplemente no los estaba
I mean,
mirando.
imagine if 5 or 10 years from
Imagínate
now,
si 5 o 10
somebody
años
were to
más
say,
adelante alguien te
2020?
iba a decir
What was so
2020.
wrong about that year?
¿Qué mal sucedía en 2020?
You might say to them, where were
Quizás
you?
vas a preguntar, ¿y dónde
I mean,
estabas
maybe it
tú?
wasn't particularly painful in your
Quizás
life.
no
Maybe somehow
sentías
you
el
managed
dolor
through it, but
en
it
tu
was a
vida,
rough
pero
year and terrible
era
things were
un año
happening and it was
difícil,
painful and
horribles
our
cosas
hearts
estaban
should
sucediendo y
hurt
nuestros corazones deben
when painful
doler
things happen to other people.
cuando las cosas malas suceden a los demás también.
And I also want to say
Y
something
también
here
yo
at this
quiero
moment
decir
about
algo
the
aquí en
source
este momento
of
de la
mourning.
fuente del
You know, it's perhaps indicative of my
llanto,
generation. I
del
don't know
del
about yours,
llorar.
but when I
Yo no
read
sé de tu
these words,
generación,
blessed are
pero
those
cuando
who mourn,
yo leo
I
eso,
tend to think
bienaventurados
of
los
grief
que
and
lloran,
mourning
yo
as the
pienso
loss that
en la
happens to me.
tristeza y el
Some
llorar,
unexpected
algo
or
que me
overwhelming
sucede a
or
mí,
gradual but
algo
painful and
que
significant and
es
outside of my
que
control
duele,
loss that happens to me.
fuera de mi control.
But Jesus might also
Pero
have been
Cristo
speaking about a
también
grief
podría
that comes
haber
from a different source
estado
when he said,
hablando
blessed
de
are those who
otra
mourn here in
situación.
this passage. What about the grief
Que
that I cause?
el dolor que yo provoco,
There's grief that happens to me,
el
but there's grief that I
dolor que
cause
yo provoco,
to God
que yo
or to
inicio,
others.
que yo causo a Dios
How
o a los
often do we
demás.
mourn
¿Cuán a menudo
the grief that we
lloramos
have caused
nosotros
others?
por el
or the
dolor
grief
que
that we have
causamos
caused
a
God?
los demás
Truly mourn
o
over
hemos
it.
causado
This word
a
mourn
Dios?
is a very
Realmente llorar,
powerful
esa
word,
palabra
a word that
llorar
means
es una
wailing.
palabra muy poderosa.
How often do we
Significa
recognize
llanto,
the
clamor.
grief that we have
¿Cuán a
caused
menudo
others and
sentimos
mourn
esta
over it?
tristeza por el dolor que hemos
There's an
causado a
author
los
who
demás?
writes,
Y
this type of mourning goes beyond just being
lloramos sobre
upset
eso.
over the consequences of sin.
Eso va más allá de
Even those who don't believe
simplemente
in God feel the pain
llorar
of
por las
sin's consequences and feel
consecuencias
sorrow over their mistakes.
pero también
But if we
sentir
really want to make a heart
tristeza
change, we
por
can't just feel
los
bad
resultados
about
de
our
nuestros
sin.
errores.
We have to move past the
Tenemos
mourning
que
of the
ir más allá
consequences to mourning
de,
the act of sin itself.
las
The
consecuencias
reality that we have sinned
a
against
llorar
God and
simplemente
others.
por
Does
el
that
hecho
hurt
de
us?
pecar contra Dios y contra los demás. Eso nos
Do you know of
debe
anyone, or
doler.
have you yourself
¿Alguna vez te
had
has
a situation where
preguntado
you've been making a series of
si
bad
has
decisions
estado
over and
tomando
over and over
decisión
again, and sometimes you
errónea
mourn the
tras
consequences,
una
but the
serie
heart
de
has not been
decisiones malas
transformed because you
y
haven't
tu
really
corazón no ha
mourned
sido
the sin itself?
transformado porque no has llorado
This is
el
why
mismo
brokenness
pecado?
over our sin is a requirement.
Eso es porque la
We
razón
need to
por qué
mourn,
el
and there is
quebrantamiento
a
sobre
blessing in
nuestros
that mourning.
pecados es importante, porque hay una
It's one thing to
bendición en
be
eso.
spiritually poor and
Es
acknowledge
una
it.
cosa ser
It's
pobre
another to
y darte
grieve and
cuenta.
mourn
Es
over it.
otra cosa
Perhaps
llorar
these
por
two
eso.
beatitudes go hand
Quizás
in hand.
esas
Blessed are the
dos
poor in spirit, and blessed are those who
bienaventuranzas
mourn.
se van juntos. Bienaventurados los pobres de espíritu y bienaventurados
Mourn their sin.
los que lloran sus pecados.
Last week we shared a story about a
La
man
semana
having
pasada
heart trouble, and he was hooked up to the
compartimos de
machine, and he
una
didn't like it. He felt
canción,
exposed, but he realized the
una
importance of
historia de un
seeing
hombre que
his heart clearly,
tenía que ver
seeing the state that it was
sus
in.
propios latidos de su propio corazón en un instrumento. Y él
Perhaps
se dio cuenta de
one
lo
of the
importante
blessings
que
that
era
comes
eso.
from mourning
Quizás unas bendiciones que
is
sale
that
del
we see
llorar
things clearly.
es que llegamos a ver las cosas más
Mourning
claramente.
means that we have
Llorar significa
acknowledged the
que
pain that the
hemos
world is in.
reconocido el dolor en que
We've
está el
acknowledged the
mundo,
brokenness
hemos
of the
reconocido
world,
el quebranto
and we have
del mundo
acknowledged
y
our
hemos
own
reconocido nuestra
brokenness
propia
and the pain that we cause others, and we
quebranto
mourn it.
y lloramos
It is a
por
first
eso.
step
Ese
necessary for the
primer
type of
paso
transformation
necesario,
we all
la
need in our
clase de
hearts, is to
transformación que cada uno de
mourn
nosotros
the
necesitamos
state
en nuestras vidas,
that our hearts are
llorar
in, that the world is in.
que por la
Blessed
situación
are
en que
those who
está nuestro
mourn.
corazón y el mundo. Bienaventurados los que
The
lloran.
second
La segunda
possibility I want to raise
posibilidad que
here
yo
this
quiero
morning is
levantar en esta
blessed
mañana es
are
bienaventurados
those who mourn
los que
might mean
lloran.
this.
Puede ser que significa
When we resist
cuando
mourning,
resistimos
we may in
el
fact be
llorar, el
resisting
llanto.
love.
Puede ser que estemos
Because the
resistiendo,
greater the connection we have
rechazando
with
el
somebody,
amor,
the greater the sense
porque
of
cuanto
loss
más
we
estamos
experience.
conectados a algo, cuanto más
And here's the great
sentimos
temptation we have with the reality
pérdida,
of suffering. We can
cuando
fear it
más
so much that
profundo
we shut
sentimos
ourselves off
la,
from living.
la
I don't know about you, but
Yo no
there's been
sé
so
de
many
ustedes,
losses that
pero
this can be a real
yo
temptation.
he experimentado
This past
tantas
summer,
pérdidas.
the losses of
El
friends, the
último
losses of
verano,
connections, the losses with fires, the
pérdidas
losses of all sorts of things.
de
You just start to
personas,
feel
de
numb.
cosas por las llantas,
There is an
por
author called
los
Brene Brown who's
incendios.
written quite a lot about
Había
vulnerability.
tantos pérdidas que
And
es
she
fácil
talks
sentir
about this sense of
insensible a
why we
esas
might
cosas.
resist
Hay una
vulnerability,
autora
resist grief,
que
resist
habla de
mourning.
las razones por
She describes the scene in the
a
beginning of a
veces
movie.
solemos resistir
And imagine it with me,
el
if you
dolor.
will. There's a scene in the beginning of the movie,
Ella
and you
habla de
see
una
it's
película
Christmas
que
season.
es
And you
Navidad la
see
película
somebody in their
y
home
alguien está en
setting up
su
the
hogar
Christmas tree, getting the
armando un árbol de
packages ready,
Navidad,
smiling and laughing together, perhaps an older
trayéndose
couple,
quizás
grandparents
una
maybe.
pareja
And
de
you see
abuelos
some people in the
y
car,
ves a
a
personas en
family
un
with their
auto,
kids in the
una
back, driving in
familia
the car, and
paseando
it's
en su
snowing,
auto
and
y
the
está
family's laughing together.
nevando y la familia está riendo
And you see the snow go, and
y
you see the
ves
scene in the car, and then you see the
la
driver looking
nieve,
to the family smiling,
el
and
chofer mirando a la familia sonriéndose,
what do you
riéndose.
anticipate?
¿Y qué es lo que anticipas?
Perhaps depending on what type of movie you're
Dependiendo de
watching.
la película
But
que
many
estás
of us, if
mirando,
we've watched enough movies, anticipate a car crash.
estás esperando que
Anticipate
algún
things
desastre
changing
ocurra,
just like that.
que las cosas van a
Anticipate a
cambiar
great
repentinamente en esta película, una
She
pérdida
describes
grande.
us as having
Él
something called
describe
foreboding
como
joy.
nosotros tenemos
When we
este
experience
gozo
something wonderful and love that is
preocupante,
great and grand,
cuando
we
experimentamos
might try and
es
pull ourselves
algo
back from it
grande
because we
y
say, this
algo
is too
lindo.
much, I can't lose
Nosotros
this. I don't want to
rechazamos
lose this,
ese
and loss
sentir
is a
porque
part of life,
no
so let me
queremos
not
perder
feel it
algo
fully.
grande. Entonces no queremos
I know
sentir
I
las cosas
experienced
porque no
this
queremos perder las
when
cosas.
I went over
Yo
to
sé que
Australia
experimenté
when
esto
I was
cuando yo
first in
visité
my very first
Australia,
pastoral position,
la primera vez,
23
mi
or
primera
24.
posición pastoral.
And I knew I was only going to
Y
be there
yo
for a
sabía
year.
que solo iba a estar ahí un
And so I
año.
said
Y
to
entonces
myself,
yo
without
dije,
even knowing it,
yo me dije,
looking back, I
sin
realized
darme
this. I said,
cuenta,
I love this church. This is a
yo
great
amo
community, but I'm
tanto
only
esa
going to be there for a
iglesia,
year. And
pero solo
if
voy
I
a estar
invest
aquí
too
un
deeply,
año. Y si
it's
me
going to hurt too
invierto
much to leave.
demasiado, me va a doler demasiado salir.
Today,
Hoy
we recognize that Pastor
reconocemos que
Paul
Pastor Paul
will be leaving us
nos va a dejar
and going to seminary.
para ir al seminario.
And yet one of the gifts that
Sin
Pastor
embargo,
Paul
uno de
has
los
given this church and one
regalos
of the
que
gifts
él
that
ha
this
dado
church has
la
given
iglesia y
him
uno de los regalos que la iglesia ha
is that it
dado a él
has not
es
held
que
back on
no
love,
ha atajado el
even
amor,
though you knew
mostrar el amor,
that at
aunque
some point this day would come.
sabíamos que algún día eso
That at
iba a
some
ocurrir,
point he would
que en
need to go on
algún día él iba a tener
to
que
seminary.
ir al
At some
seminario
point a loss would come.
y en algún momento esta pérdida iba a
That you
venir,
loved him
pero
and he
igual
loves you.
le ama
And
y él
because of
te
that, the
ama a ti
mourning is greater.
y por eso
But the
la
mourning
pérdida es más grande, más
recognizes
profunda,
that love that we have for
pero
each other.
nosotros podemos reconocer el amor que
There is a
tenemos
Christian
el uno
author
para
by
el
the
otro.
name
Hay
of
un autor
C.S.
cristiano
Lewis
llamado
who wrote
C.S.
this little
Lewis
book called
que escribió un
A
libro
Grief
llamado
Observed.
un dolor
He wrote
observado.
it
Él escribió ese libro
after his wife
después
passed
de que
away
su esposa
from cancer.
falleció debido al
And he
cáncer.
wrote it.
Y él escribió
He had
este
been
libro
a bachelor for most of his life, and he met his
siendo
wife late
un
in life.
soltero casi la
And at
mayor
first he had been
parte
quite
de su vida,
resistant to
pero
anything
le
growing,
conoció a su
and it
señora
took him unawares, and it was
a
only
una edad
when he
avanzada
found out that she had cancer
y él
that
resistía
they
a amarle
declared their love for each other.
profundamente,
They got
pero
married in the
solo era
face of
cuando
it.
él se dio
He
cuenta
knew that her
de
time
que
was
ella
short,
tenía cáncer, que él le propuso el
but that the
matrimonio,
love
porque él
was
sabía
great.
que su tiempo era corto, pero el amor era
Blessed are those who
profundo.
mourn
Bienaventurados los que lloran
deeply, because
profundamente,
it means that you have
porque
loved
significa
deeply.
que has amado
If we are not
profundamente.
mourning,
Si no estamos
friends, we've
llorando,
shut off a part of ourselves.
hemos apagado una parte de nosotros
And that
mismos.
makes sense too.
Y eso también tiene sentido.
It is hard.
Está
Grief is hard.
difícil.
We
Es
don't want to
difícil.
experience
No queremos
loss.
experimentar la pérdida.
But
Sin
we've
embargo,
heard it said,
lo hemos
that poem from
escuchado.
Lord Alfred
Ese
Tennyson,
poema de
who wrote it after his
que dice
22-year-old friend
que
died.
un
He
señor
said,
escribió.
I hold it true, whate'er
Yo,
befall, I feel it when I sorrow
acepto como
most.
verdad.
'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at
Sugiere lo
all.
que sugiere. Pase lo que pase. Es mejor haber
Is it true?
amado y perdido que no haber amado en esta vida.
God has done that for us.
Dios ha hecho
God has given us his
eso para
heart,
nosotros. Él nos ha
knowing
entregado
that this
su
world is
corazón,
full of broken
sabiendo
edges,
que ese mundo
knowing that
está
it will be
lleno de
cut up into a
puntos
million
agudos
pieces,
que puede ser
but it did not
cortado en
prevent
miles de
God
pedazos.
from giving
Pero
us
eso
his
no le
heart,
atajó a Dios en
from loving
darnos
deeply
su amor, de
and loving
amarnos
well.
profundamente y amarnos bien.
Blessed are you who
Bienaventurados
mourn.
los que lloran,
You are catching a glimpse of the love that
Estás
God has for us.
captando un vistazo
You mourn because you
del
love.
amor que Dios tiene para nosotros.
And the third,
Y la tercera
this
razón
morning,
en esta mañana,
the third
la
follows
tercera sigue
the logic of this
la
passage
lógica de
itself.
nuestro pasaje, este pasaje mismo.
When we resist mourning,
Cuando resistimos
we may also be
llorar,
resisting
quizás
God's comfort.
estamos resistiendo el consuelo
Blessed are those who mourn,
de
Jesus
Dios.
says,
Bienaventurados los que lloran, dice
because
Jesús,
they will be
porque
comforted,
serán consolados, consolados,
strengthened.
fortalecidos.
Blessed are those who mourn,
Bienaventurados
perhaps
los que
because
lloran, quizás porque
this comfort means that you
ese
are seen
consuelo
clearly. You show
muestra
up clearly,
que
you
vas a
embrace
ver
reality, and you are seen
ver
and
claramente.
comforted. There's a practice
Hay una práctica
in Judaism
en el
called
judaísmo
sitting Shiva,
llamado
When someone dies,
la
the close
chiva
family
sentado.
members of
Cuando
the
alguien
deceased
muera,
stay in their home for 7 days, and families and
la
friends
gente viene
come to
a
the
su
house
casa
and they sit
durante 7
Shiva
días
with
y
them.
ellos se sienten
They often sit close to the ground,
Shiva, el término Shiva, sentados
and the
cerca a
family
la
members or
tierra,
friends come and sit in
y
silence until
los
the
miembros de
mourner
la familia
speaks, and then they
vienen
share just one or two
y
ideas or
se
thoughts, but it's at the
sientan
pace of the mourner.
y comparten
And there's a
recuerdos.
habit, there's a
Y es un
practice of
costumbre,
sitting
una
Shiva where all
práctica
the mirrors
donde todos los
in the house
espejos
are covered,
en la casa están tapadas.
because
¿Por qué?
this is not a time
Porque no
to
es un
care about the
tiempo
image that you
para
present.
preocuparse por la imagen que
This is a time to
presentas.
show up
Es un momento
as you
de
really are,
llegar
and
como
have
realmente
someone
eres
come and sit next to you,
y que alguien venga
someone
para estar al
come
lado
and
tuyo,
comfort you.
para que alguien venga para
A friend of
consolarte.
mine
Un
who
amigo mío
has
quien
experienced a loss
ha
recently
experimentado
described
una
going
pérdida
to the
así
family of their loved ones and people
recientemente
just sitting on the ground, and she describes it as
y
going to
nos
ground.
habló de
We're
una
stripped of all
situación
pretense
así.
of words, we're sitting together as we
Es
truly
como
are,
ir a la
consumed by
tierra
grief.
misma mientras uno está
And Jesus says,
consumido por el dolor. Y Cristo dice,
I will sit Shiva,
yo sentaré en esta Shiva con
I will
usted.
come, I will send a
Yo
comforter,
vendré y
we will sit
yo
together.
mandaré un
You are not
consolador
alone
y
in this
y
grief.
van a estar juntos, no estás solo en
You've
este
experienced a great loss.
dolor. Si has experimentado
You
una
might
gran
have held on
pérdida,
to those words, but
quizás
wondered, you might have
aferraste
experienced
a
a
esas
sense of
palabras
isolation or being alone.
y te preguntabas si estabas sintiendo esta
And this
consolación.
happens sometimes.
Eso
Even with those who
sucede.
sit Shiva, they might
Aún con
they
esos
might
que
be so
están
consumed by
sentados
their own grief that
Shiva,
they didn't realize who was sitting next to them.
no se dan cuenta
And
de
they
las
felt
personas que
terribly
están
alone.
a su alrededor y sienten
But then the
horribles.
day comes
Pero viene el día
when they look up
cuando miran
and they look
a
after
su
to their right,
alrededor, a su
and they
izquierda,
see
a
the
su
face
derecha, y
of
ven
someone
la
who's been there
cara,
all along,
el rostro de alguien que ha estado allí durante todo el
who says,
tiempo
I have been with you.
y que dice, yo he estado contigo.
I have
Cristo nos
never
dice,
left you or
yo he estado
forsaken you.
contigo, no te he dejado, no te he abandonado.
There's a poem that goes like
Hay una
this.
poesía que es así.
I walked a mile with
Yo
pleasure,
caminé
she
una
shouted
milla
all the
con
way,
placer y
but left me none the
hablamos
wiser
con
for all
todo,
she
pero
had
no me
to say.
dejó
I walked
contenta.
a mile
Yo
with
caminé
sorrow, and
una
not a word said she.
milla con
But
tristeza
oh, the
y no me
things I
dijo
learned
ninguna
when
palabra.
sorrow walked with me.
Pero qué cosas aprendí cuando la
When we
tristeza
sit
caminó
in the
conmigo.
presence of grief, when
Cuando
we mourn
sentimos en
the
la presencia
reality of it,
del dolor, de la pérdida y
when we
pensamos en la
listen to the
realidad de
Spirit
eso,
that
cuando
comes
escuchamos el
alongside
Espíritu
us,
que viene a nuestro lado,
we can be comforted.
podemos ser consolados.
And it's only through opening
Y
ourselves
solo
up
es a
to
través de
mourning that we can open
abrirnos
ourselves
al
up to this comfort.
congojo,
When we
que
try and repress
abrimos
it,
a
when we run
nuestra
away
clase
from
de
it, when we
consolación,
pretend
cuando
it isn't so
huimos de
bad,
eso,
we don't let
cuando
people,
lo
we don't let the
guardamos
Spirit draw close.
y no permitimos que el Espíritu se acerque a
When I've
nosotros.
sat in the presence
Cuando
of
yo
people who've experienced great loss
he estado en la presencia
and
de personas que han
listened to their
perdido a
stories,
personas,
I have heard
yo he
them
escuchado
share
a ellos
that sense of
compartir
comfort
ese
that has come
sentir
to them.
de consolación que ha venido a
This
ellos.
section here,
Esta
this promise
sección
of
aquí,
comfort,
esta
friends,
promesa de
it's not
consolación,
really something
no es
that can be
realmente
explained.
algo que se puede explicar,
It is something that is
es algo
experienced.
que se experimenta.
But when we don't feel it, we
Pero
hold on
cuando
to it
no
with
lo
both
sentimos,
hands.
aferramos a eso con las dos manos.
We hold on to the
Aferramos
promises of others.
a
We
las
hold on to the
promesas de
promises of
los
Scripture
demás, a
that the
las de la
light of
Escritura,
God's love
que
can
la
break
luz
through the darkness,
del amor de Dios puede romper
and that
la
we
oscuridad
shall
y que
be
nosotros
comforted.
seremos consolados.
So today,
Para hoy,
as we sit with these
al
words in a season
sentarnos con
that
esas
is hard,
palabras en una temporada que
those
es
of us who have
difícil,
lost
un
loved
momento
ones,
que es difícil.
those
Los de
of us
nosotros
who are
hemos perdido
exhausted by
seres
the grief
queridos,
after
los que
grief,
estamos
maybe mini griefs of this season
exhaustos
of
por las
2020.
pequeñas
We
pérdidas
just goes
de
on and
este
on and on, and
2020
we are tempted to numb ourselves.
y hemos intentado ponernos
The words of Jesus
duros.
say,
Las palabras de
"Blessed
Dios,
are
de Cristo
those
dice,
who grieve."
bienaventurados los que llora,
who are willing to see
quienes están
clearly,
dispuestos a
who
ver
are
las
willing
cosas
to
tal
mourn
como
the way that we
están
have hurt God and others,
y llorar por la
who are
manera que
willing to
hemos
love
causado dolor
deeply
a los
and well
demás
even
y
now
a
when there is
Dios,
so
que
much
están
grief around
dispuestos a
us,
amar profundamente
who do not
aún mientras hay
detach
tanto mal en
but
nuestro alrededor,
engage,
quienes no se
and blessed
desconectan,
are
sino
those
conectan
who
y
experience the presence of God
bienaventurados
sitting on the
que
ground
experimentan
next
la
to them,
presencia de Dios sentado
saying, "There is
en el
nowhere
piso a
you
nuestro
can go
lado,
where I will not be
diciendo
with you."
que no hay ningún lugar donde te puedes ser, donde yo no te puedo
These words
acompañar. Estas palabras
in Matthew
en Mateo
are an invitation
son una
to
invitación
recognize
a
mourning
reconocer
and loss.
el llanto, el
But
congojo,
Matthew
la pérdida.
echoes a grand vision
Pero Mateo
that we see
hace eco de una
named
visión más
and
grande
described in the book of Isaiah.
que vemos reescrito en el libro
In
de
Isaiah
Isaías. En
61,
Isaías 61,
the prophet,
versículos 1,
who is
2
one
y
who
3,
mourns deeply, who
el
sees
profeta que
clearly,
está
and who
llorando
proclaims
profundamente y ve las cosas
loudly
claramente y
these
proclama
words: "The Spirit of the
fuerte.
sovereign Lord
Él
is
dice
on
esas
me,
palabras,
because the
el
Lord
Espíritu
has anointed me to
de Jehová, el
proclaim
Señor
good
está sobre mí
news to the
porque me ha
poor.
ungido Jehová.
He
Me
has
ha
sent me to
enviado a
bind up
predicar
the
buenas
brokenhearted,
noticias
to
al
proclaim
pobre, a
freedom
vender
for the
las
captives, release from darkness
quebrantados
for the
de
prisoners,
corazón, a
to proclaim
publicar
the year of the
libertad a
Lord's
los
favor and the day
cautivos
of
y
vengeance
a
of
los
our God,
prisioneros
and to comfort
apertura de
all
la
who
cárcel,
mourn.
a proclamar el año de la buena
Provide for
voluntad
those who
de
grieve
Jehová
in
y el
Zion,
día de la
and
vergüenza, de la venganza del Dios
crown of
nuestro,
beauty.
a consolar a todos
Instead of
los que están
ashes,
de luto,
the oil of joy.
a
Instead
ordenar
of
que a
mourning,
los
a
afligidos de
garment of
Sión
praise.
se les
Instead of a
dé
spirit of despair,
esplendor en
they will be
lugar de
called
cenizas,
oaks of
aceite de gozo en
righteousness,
lugar de
a
luto,
planting of the
manto de
Lord
alegría
for the
en
display
lugar
of
del
his
espíritu
splendor.
angustiado. Serán llamados árboles de
The
justicia,
promises of
plantíos
God.
de Jehová
The
para
ashes
gloria suya. Las
will be
promesas de Dios,
exchanged
las
for beauty,
cenizas van a ser cambiados por
and
gozo,
mourning for
por
joy.
hermosura y llantos por
And so
gozo.
today,
Entonces
as
hoy,
we close
al
this time together,
cerrar este
I'm going
tiempo
to
juntos,
invite our
les voy a invitar
praise team
a
to come up
nuestro equipo de
and invite
alabanza
us to sing those words we sang about the
y
peace
vamos a cantar
and
las
love of
palabras
God
que
again.
hemos cantado sobre la paz
And as we go
y
through
el
this
amor de
coming month,
Dios.
this
Al
coming
pasar
week,
por los siguientes meses,
may we turn
semanas,
to God with
esta
our
semana misma,
mourning
que podamos tornar a
and
Dios
turn to
con
Him
nuestro
for our
llanto
comfort.
y también tornar a Él por nuestra consolación.
Let us sing together.
Vamos a cantar juntos.